Okay. Okay. So just as a clarification, at the bottom of page 1 of 2, the CIF. So 10 is no. Is that right? Right. Right. Yes. Okay. Okay, so we have that clarification. So I am at this point in time, I'll go ahead and give the House an opportunity. You've had some time to discuss where we are. Did you have any type of offer that you would like to make?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the first item, and I don't have anything typed prepared. The first item I'd like to offer the Senate would be the requirement of school districts to use the LOB that's attributable to special education for special education purposes, and it would be transferred in the special education fund. So all money that is attributable or generated from special education must be transferred into the special education fund and be used for that purpose.
And that is the LOB.
Yes, that is the LOB, the portion that is attributable. That's the first item.
Okay.
The second item would be an item that we consider to be very important, that we believe includes the accountability, the transparency, and the accuracy, which is that item, which is the calculation of that item. But for this year, we'll remove that item. So we will not count it in the calculation, but we'll still be looking at it every year. And from my perspective, it is money that should be used, and it will be used for those students. But we'll give a year, and we'll review it again in future years, but not include it in the calculation. So LOB is not part of the calculation. The next item is related to the special education funding. We will not give the $77.5 million. We will give the governor's amount, and that's $74,878,525. Of that amount, the SGF would be approximately 72.3 million. We will take the E-rate money of 2.5 million and include it in the governor's total. For the next item, number 4, if you would look at your bill relating to the maintenance of effort, it would be on page 36 of the new version as amended on the House floor.
I'm just going to ask, we're going to just pause for a second. Could someone just ask the individual that's out there singing if he could just kind of, it's okay.
Doing.
So if someone could go next door and ask them. Thank you. Send a senator.
We could just open it and invite them in.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let's get back. Let's just give a round of applause for the solo.
Lacey's Representative Carmichael. Yeah. That says Carmichael. It all. Quack up.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get back to maintenance of effort, page 36.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So on page 36, and it is line 40, I think that's correct, Nick. And the maintenance of effort says 528 million to ensure that that money is, once we place that money in, that 72.3 million SGF, it will remain. It will be maintained in the maintenance of effort. And so that number would change, 528 would change to approximately 608 million. That would be our new starting place. The next item, and I believe it's the last item, it would be on page 37. And it's the item that talks about in fiscal year 2025, that 528 million would remain. So that's the amount of the base that we use to calculate increases. And that would be the 2024 amount. So anything above that 528 million would be from that number and from here on out. So any additions, then we would use the distribution formula that the State Board of Education chooses based on the consideration of the excess cost and the 92% schedule at the district level. And then in terms of the other policy, those would stay consistent. Those are the only changes we have, Madam Chair. Actually, there was one other. The capital improvement. This was a motion that Representative Poskin brought, and it did pass. However, with talking with the Department of Education on this and our revisors, we do think that there's concern with equity, and we don't want, even though we're not under Gannon anymore, we don't want to violate that and have potentially schools that have less money average per pupil be subject to that because they didn't have, well, actually, let me just back that, because they didn't have any capitalization as capital state aid equalization. So we're going to remove that. Yeah, I can. I think I'm tired. But basically, remember in committee, the capital improvement state aid is there's an equalization. It did not exist before 1992. Those were the best estimates that we had. And so in addition to that, so every building that was built prior to that would have been exempt from this legislation. But what we were trying to do is if a school district had built a building and received no capital improvement state aid, then they would have been exempt. And it seems like a very practical thing to do. I agree with that. However, it creates potential equity issues. And since we have heard that now from our revisors as well as those at KSDE, we would rather err on the side of caution and make it the same for everyone. All right. So everybody would.
Quinn, ask the question in the mic, please.
So the buildings are exempt? What's the question?
Yeah, no, the buildings aren't exempt. We are removing the Representative Poskin's amendment that originally would have allowed those that did not receive capital improvement state aid to be exempt, and now no one is exempt. And it's because of the equity issue. So we're removing that provision. Good provision. Unfortunately, out of caution, we're removing it.
So I would like a little bit of clarification, and I think, Jennifer, you could provide it for us. When we were originally looking at the 77.5, you had indicated that with the consensus estimate, it probably would look more like 82 million. So if we have a reduction from the 77.5, to the 74.8 million. What does that do to consensus revenue in actuality? Or is there a way to ascertain what a true difference? Will it continue to be roughly a 4.5 million regardless of how it moves?
Jennifer Light Kalerty. So the consensus revenue estimates are done 3 times before we get to a final number. So we reevaluate that in the spring and then the fall, and then once again in the spring before it's finalized. So right now, from the fall estimates, we are saying that it's 535.5 million is what the state aid is for special education. In a few weeks, we'll have a new number for 25 that will be closer to the final number, but the final number for 25 is not finalized at this point. So as it was with that 77.5, it was at about 82. When we move it back down to 72 million, that puts us at roughly 79.7 million above that 528 million.
Sorry, did you say 79.5 or 79.7? I wrote 7, but I thought I heard 5.
$79.7.
7. Okay. Then all right. Okay. From the Senate side, did you have any questions of the House on their offer? Senator Sykes.
Thank you. Clarification on item 2, that calculation. That is the new kind of SPED formula. You are saying you will hold that for 1 year. It would remain to be the current SPED formula and not including the LOB in the 92%. Is that what that provision was?
Or Representative
Yes.
Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the provision was taking out the LOB calculation for the special education portion and then counting that local option money and that supplemental state aid money. It was never in statute. We were adding it in statute. We're taking the calculation out. So we're taking the calculation out. We believe it should be in, but we're taking the calculation out. However, we are inserting in its place, and we've heard that this is something that districts are already doing. This does not seem the problematic portion of it. We're inserting in its place that districts must use that money, that LOB money that's attributable to special education for special education, and they must put it into the fund. However, it's not part of the calculation.
Did you have an additional question on that?
Okay, just to clarify, there was something in your original statement about not using it for the calculation for the first year.
No.
Representative Williams.
I'm not sure what that was referencing or how I said that. But no, it's not for the, I think yes, I remember what I said. What I'm saying, we can look at it again in another year.
Okay, but completely removing that provision of changing the calculation.
Yes,
Okay,
yes. The LOB is removed. However, the portion that it's accounted for, but we're not putting it into the calculation. Nick, would you like to follow up?
Yeah, I'll call on him. Go ahead, Nick. Sorry. That's okay.
Thank you. And just for drafting purposes, I want to clarify something. So right now, we could either remove the LOB calculation from the changes that are being made to this excess cost formula in this bill, or are we reverting to current law, maintaining the same excess cost formula without any of the changes besides the LOB transfer provision?
We are maintaining. Is that not your request, to maintain the process with the calculation, with the
Yes.
exception that the LOB attributable to special education state aid would be deposited and would only be used for special education.
So maintain the current formula that's in current law for the excess cost calculation with the,
Would you like to kind of explain how they do very, very similar things, but one uses the legal max, one doesn't? And I'd like us to maintain the one that has the most clarity. So maybe speak to the differences without the LOB.
they are very similar. Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. If
Yes, Nick, please explain.
They are very similar in the way, in the manner in which they get to the excess cost, the total excess cost. The primary change in the current bill is the counting of the local option budget. So ultimately, it's a decision on your part, a policy decision of which formula to maintain. I will note there is the individual district formula as well, and they should likely match each other.
That was my question that I was going to ask with regard to establishing an individual school district special education excess formula. So, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it would be of much greater ease to maintain it the way that you have it written. Just take out the LOB portion, because then we've got consistency. So we're going to maintain it the way that it is currently in the bill, removing the calculation for the LOB, but inserting instead that we're going to require those monies to be transferred into and to be used for special education. We will also maintain the portion that says anything above the 528 million will be used or distributed by the state board with a 92% excess cost by district in consideration.
Okay, so the Senate is going to take a moment to give consideration, and we're going to start with items 1 and 2. was a clarification, and I think, Nick, you can help us with that. So on item number 1, as far as the requirement for special education LOB funds to be transferred into the special education account, that would be section 16. Is that correct? In the reviser's notes?
Yes, that is correct. That is currently in the bill, and that is section 16, and that is in subsection I1, capital C, requiring that special education amount that's attributable in the LOB to be transferred to the special education fund.
Okay.
Yes, that's on page 44 of the bill.
Okay. And then the next question that we had was with regard to the calculation. So this would be item number 2. We wanted to verify, is that in fact section 14? And are we just removing section 14?
So thank you. So that is you are correct, Madam Chair. That is section 14 of the bill. That's the conversation I was having or trying to get clarity on as to whether we're going back to the current formula and current law. So if you were to remove section 14, that would take this formula back to what is in current law rather than what Chair Williams' offer was. The other part of section 14 that I believe the House is intending to keep and made some updates to was on page 36 in new subsection D and page 37 regarding the State Board of Education's equalization distribution method. So that section would not be removed.
Okay. So the first, by removing it, that brings us back to the status quo by fiat, correct?
Essentially, yes. And then my understanding would be also within the individual district excess costs, the local option budget portion would be removed as well, just like it's being done in this statewide excess cost formula.
Okay. Committee, excuse me. Does that answer the questions? Okay. So before we move on to any type of agreement on the SPED funding, maintenance of effort, or the base as identified in items 3, 4, and 5, I know that we are going to want to be looking at some of the items that were originally on the pink sheet that are now on the white sheet. But before we get to that, I want to talk about something that seems to be lost in all of this discussion. You know, we've heard a lot about what it is that superintendents want, what it is that KSB wants, what it is that, we've heard the scream of get us to the 92%. But one thing that seems to be lost in this is any opportunity that the legislature, regardless of adding each year now, regardless of adding to the SPED funds and to the CPI average, what isn't ever addressed and what legislature has tried over and over to achieve, put more money in the classroom. And when we say put more money in the classroom, we know the most important component in the classroom is the teacher. We are not ever directly able to impact what happens to the teachers as far as their compensation. You know, the legislature has spent several of the past years assuring that State government employees get certain percents. I wasn't a part of it. I voted against it. But even the legislature found a way to increase by a very significant percent their pay for future years. I was opposed to it, stood opposed to it. But this is an opportunity while we are negotiating to have a real impact directly on teachers. We know right now we have more than 1,800 vacancies in our schools. We know that we have long-term substitutes that have been teaching our class. So there is a bill that was introduced in the Senate. It was also introduced in the House. There was a hearing in the Senate Education. There was a hearing in the House. I believe it was in FI&I. And that was to take our teachers that are in Tier 3 and move them to Tier 2. We had a hearing in Senate Education. We passed it out of Senate Education unanimously. In fact, the co-sponsor of that bill is here, and that would be Senator Clues. He was the primary sponsor for that. So I would like the House to give consideration to us taking that first step. I know that promises were made 4 years ago with the new legislators that were voted in, that would be addressed. 2 years ago, when a new group of House members got in, a promise was made that would be addressed. It was just this year in Senate Education that the problem was ever first addressed in a 4-year time period. So I would like you to take a few moments to think about. If you're not ready to make a decision, please let us know. But that would be an action that on our floor, where we could directly impact a large group of our teachers. The teachers that have been here since, correct me, since 2019, is that correct? Or is it 2017? Great, I was way off, 2015. So do you want to take a few minutes to think about it, or do you want to get back with us on it later?
So go ahead and tell us what bill number that is again.
Senate substitute for House Bill 2646.
And that was, and do the real concise explainer again, please.
What it does is it takes teachers, so that is bargaining unit teachers, and it takes all of those that are Tier 3, and it moves them into Tier 2. Included in our testimony, all of the background information, it came through Alan Conroy. He was the first individual to testify. He gave us all of the background information.
Could you give us the fiscal note?
Yes, we can. And there actually, Mr. Conroy shared that there were 2 ways in which we could pay. It could be a lump sum, or it could be paid out over the course of, was it 20 years?
So, Madam Chair, the fiscal note that was submitted for the original bill, Senate Bill 479, addresses 2 ways, as the chair mentioned, to pay for, and that is the cost for the unfunded actuarial liability to reopen Tier 2 for those teachers and for all new teachers to qualify starting July 1, 2024 for participation. The others would come in by January 1, 2025, those who are currently in Tier 3. That would be $134 million. That's the difference between the 2 plan benefit designs. So that would be the option 1 would be to amortize over 20 years for that increase in the unfunded actuarial liability. The bill does not have that pay for from state general fund. The other option then would be to increase the employer contribution rates. And those rates are included. It would be about a 0.46% change in the member rate. And we have the bill and fiscal in the subnote if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to need to actually see it if you have it. So I think this is going to take us just a little bit of time. I'm not as familiar with capers. It's not something that we've dealt with in our committee, and I've been blessed not to be in that committee. So I think we need, if you wouldn't mind, I think maybe 20 minutes, or we could
I
come
think
back
that we
later.
could- I think that we could, did you want to talk about some of the other items before we leave? I think I'd like us to talk about a few other items. And we understand this is something that you'll need to come back to. Why do we bring this up? Well, part of the impetus for this was the legislative post audit that absolutely identified that Tier 3 is truly not a retirement. It is not a retirement fund, not in any manner the way Tier 1 and Tier 2 is. The other component to that is we did have testimony from superintendents. And in fact, every one of the school districts in my Senate district, and I did some checking, and most all of the school districts that I checked indicated that that was either their first or their second top priority from a legislative standpoint. So at this time, I will call on Senator Erickson, and let's go ahead and talk about some of the items from the white list that we have discussed, and that you would like to make an offer, that we would like to make an offer as far as perhaps pulling. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm on the pink sheet, but I'll make sure that the numbers correspond or to the white sheet as well. So I'm looking at number 6 on the pink sheet. And I think it's the same on the white sheet. Okay, just making sure they're formatted a little differently, but I think they are the same. Madam Chair, as you indicated at our last conference committee, the narrative out there that the legislature isn't fulfilling its obligation related to funding and to vote no on the previous package, I come back to we are going above and beyond. And if the narrative's going to be that the legislature isn't doing it, I can think of a million other places of agencies and programs that are suffering and are underfunded and could use that money that we're putting into professional development. Schools are going to get an additional over a third of $1 billion in new money. And if they can't find the money to do their professional development for their teachers, then I think that speaks to their ability to manage their funds. So I would request that we remove the professional development funding.
And I believe that's 1.9 million. Is that correct? Okay. Is there any other area that you would like to see removed at this time? Yes, you had a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to pull back out 387, and I'm going to need Jennifer's help on this, or Melissa's. And I do believe there are quite a few line items of professional development that are not included. So just for clarity, you're not striking all of it, or you are striking all of it? You're just striking the increase only, not the 1.8 that was already in the budget?
Senator Erickson.
We'll see how negotiations progress.
Okay. And then in addition to that, Jennifer or Melissa, how much do we spend in federal money? And I think it would probably be mostly federal money on professional development, because I know there's quite a few line items that include it.
Representative Williams.
So I am looking at the original bill, and on page 8, the Rural and Low Income Schools Program Federal Fund, Title 5, there is teacher professional development in that, maybe around $320,000, maybe 192 in 2025. And then on page 9 of the original, there's the state grants for improving teacher quality federal funds. And it looks like there's 15.9 million in that. And that's professional development and preparation, training, and recruiting. And those are the two that I know of. So that's quite a bit. So we're looking at least $16 million. No, 17, maybe $18 million of professional development money between state and federal. I just didn't know if there was anything else.
I'm just going to need a minute to figure that out.
That's okay. While she's figuring that out, one thing I do, when you come back to us a little later with regard to the Senate's offer with regard to CAPERS Tier 3 to Tier 2, I do want you to know that one of the things that Alan Conroy did convey, and this was reinforced by Senator Petty, who has served on the interim committees, the CAPERS interim committees, to delay to next year will cost more than $26 million to delay for another year. So every year that we keep kicking the can down the road with regard to addressing that. I also want to remind those that are watching, those that are here today, as well as our House members, that there was a carve out when they created Tier 3. So corrections individuals already remained, even today. Any new corrections individual goes right into Tier 2. So one of the questions during the hearing was, why a carve out for teachers? That is where our highest demand, highest need is in our schools. And a carve out had already occurred. So we already have a precedent for that. We're letting Jenny, you're still working on it. As you continue to work on it, and we appreciate you being here and helping us, I will go ahead and call on Senator Erickson again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at the white sheet, number 7, $1 million for mentor teacher program. In my experience as a teacher, as a principal, as a school board member, and I know this isn't the case in every district, but in my experience in over 20 years in public education, the best mentor teachers were those that were next door to a new teacher, whether that might be the department chair, and you had a relationship where you went to them continually as needed. It wasn't pulling out and going down to district office and sitting there and getting extra pay. A good teacher is going to take a new teacher under their wing and be there next door to them to guide them in classroom management, to answer their questions, to help them with content area. And so I would respectfully suggest that we delete the $1 million for mentor teacher program.
We do need a little help on this. You said the $1 million, but I'm indicating that lines 7 and 8 make it 2.3 million. It's 1.3 existing. Okay, thank you. Okay. You absolutely may. Senator Erickson.
Silence is not a good thing. I'm going to feel it. To the point about the capers and the tiers, one of the other things we keep hearing about that we have a teacher shortage, and one of the other narratives being pounded out there by organizations is if we fully funded SPED and they didn't have to take money from their general fund, they could give teacher raises. I would challenge districts before we officially act on that. Maybe you ought to take some of that 200 to 250 million CPI and give your teachers a raise. But I just had a school board member call me yesterday, Madam Chair, say their teachers were fighting to get any kind of a raise while they give their superintendent an $11,000 a year raise. So I would challenge our districts. You're going to have over 200, 250 million in CPI. Give your teachers a raise. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you.
I believe that there are several different federal funds that do partially provide for professional development. So I would say that the number I'm going to give you is the total number for those funds, but they are not only to be used for professional development. And that I have it at 16.6 million between 3 different funds that I am seeing. But again, I would say that that is not fully for professional development. Those are only part of what those federal funds can be used for. And I cannot tell you how much of that is actually being used for professional development currently. And that would be for fiscal year 25, the dollar amount.
So could you, as a point of clarification, if you know, if it's in your purview to determine, is it's federal dollars that can be used, it's not required to be used just for that? Is that how I understand it?
Yes, Madam Chair, that these are federal dollars and they have a list of different things that they can be used for, and professional development is included, teacher professional development is included as a option, but it is not the sole purpose of any of those funds.
So I know that he doesn't like to get called on often, but I see Mr. John Hess nodding his head in the back. And so would you mind please coming to the microphone? I know. I just saw you whisper some words. I'm not a lip reader, so I don't know what you said, but could you clarify for us? So did the federal funds come into the Department of Education and then you distribute them out? And are these funds already committed for something different from professional development?
Madam Chair, members of the conference committee. So those funds, specifically Fund 3526 that Jenny mentioned, is Title 2A, which is these are federal formula grants that have to be used. I mean, they can be used for a variety of specific purposes, but they can only be used for those specific purposes. So 3526 goes out as state aid or federal aid. I don't want to say state aid, federal aid to school districts. So it is sub-granted to school districts for allowable activities.
Does that go out to all school districts? Like we get this total amount, we divide it by the number, by the student population. How is that determined?
Madam Chair, I'd have to go and talk to our federal program staff on, I guess, Monday. But yes,
It is distributed.
It is distributed out. So depending on depending on the program. So some of them may be competitive awards that school districts have to apply for, and then others are set up as formula awards. So it's a formula at the federal level that determines how much is awarded to Kansas, and then KSDE has to follow a federal formula when distributing it out to school districts.
Okay, thank you. Did you have a question, Representative Williams, on that? No. Senator Erickson, did you have a question? Okay. So did the House want to give some consideration to these items that were mentioned as far as cutting? Or do you want to? We are oblivious to what's happening. I know we're yawning in the back row. So we're oblivious to what's happening in the House and the Senate. Does anyone know? Are they on the floor? Senate's on the floor. Does anyone know what the House is doing? Okay. Is the Senate working on bills right now? Can you tell? Yes. Okay. 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 So the ask is for us to meet in about another 25 minutes. So since my committee assistant isn't here, she's not going to send the message out. We will announce from the floor. We'll try and get back here in about 25 minutes. Thank you.